The red knot is a red-bellied shorebird that is particularly known for its extremely long migration pattern from the tip of South America to the Arctic. The red knot, also known as the Calodreus cantus, is a part of the phylum Chordata. The species of red knot native to Nova Scotia is the Rufa red knot. The biology of the red knot is quite fascinating. With a body length of 23 to 25 centimeters and a wingspan of 45 to 54 centimeters, it is able to fluctuate in weight anywhere from 85 to 220 grams during a season. During the winter months, the red knot spends time in South America on sand estuaries and beaches, eating things like small mussels and crustaceans and insects. Their bills are long and thick, allowing them to easily crush the shell of their prey. Before migration occurs, the red knot goes from a brown and white plumage to a reddish-brown colored plumage that will allow them to camouflage into their new environment in the Arctic. Their bills become short and thin as their energy is put into increasing body weight and molting. On their migration, they will stop 1 or 2 times to fatten up. At this point, they will need to gain an additional 50% of their normal body weight to make the journey.
There are three main bodies of water in Nova Scotia that these birds reside at during their migration route. This would include the Gulf of the St. Lawrence, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Bay of Fundy. Intertidal zones of these areas are common zones for feeding horseshoe crabs, mollusks, and other invertebrates. The Rufa subspecies undertake one of the longest migration routes out of all the red knots. They arrive farthest north, the Canadian Arctic, in late June, a season devoted for mating and breeding. Come August, early September, the Rufa red knot continue their journey to the farthest of the Southern America, the tip of Argentina, where they spend much of their winter season. The threat of the food availability is a crucial concern for these birds migrating approximately 30,000 kilometers a year. An inefficient source of food supplies will cause the birds to not meet their desired energy requirements during their stopovers. This would result in lower body masses before flight to the northern and southern hemispheres, reflecting a decline in their fitness, ultimately leading to a higher mortality rate and lower birth rate of the population.
The red knot breeds in the tundra in the Arctic. It has a low vegetation and low elevation, but the red knot are still hard to find. They can only be found by scientists by the male's mating calls. Red knots depend greatly on the fat that they have stored after stopping to eat horseshoe crab eggs during their first week. Their energy is put into reproducing and protecting their eggs from harsh weather. Two of the major threats to the red knot species is the food availability during their migrational stops and climate change. The main food resource for them is horseshoe crab eggs during their brief stopovers, such as the stopover in Delaware Bay. The red knots do not have the strength after traveling great distances to digest invertebrates. Therefore, horseshoe crab eggs are particularly crucial for their diet. There is not enough horseshoe crab eggs due to overfishing of specifically female horseshoe crabs to use as fish bait, and overfishing of horseshoe crab eggs for their medical uses, such as their unique blue blood. Their blue blood contains endotoxins that are used to test things like vaccines. The horseshoe crabs are bled until as much as 1/3 of their blood is collected and then released back into the wild. The problem with this method is that 15% of the already declining population of horseshoe crabs do not survive the draining process. Horseshoe crabs take about 9 to 11 years to become full-size and sexually mature. Since the population is already so low, it will take a while for the next generation of horseshoe crabs to lay their eggs. The low availability of horseshoe crab eggs might be the red knot's demise. Another threat to the red knot is climate change. Scientists are not exactly sure how climate change will affect the red knot directly, but it most likely will affect or change the ecosystem they breed in. Coastal habitats will be lost due to rising sea levels. Storm and weather patterns also may change during the migration, causing the already weak birds, due to lack of food availability, to have a higher mortality rate.
For most organisms, there are conservative strategies set in place to preserve populations from many disturbances. SARA, standing for Species at Risk Act, attempt to prevent decline of species in Canada by providing recovery of endangered and threatened species. Recommendation is sent, taking about 3 months for a response. Once initial response is retrieved, it could take up as long as 9 months for a final decision to be confirmed. Either it's sent back for more intel or accepted or rejected. The IUCN, International Union for Conservation Nature, Red List of Threatened Species, lists red knots on a worldwide scale as being least concern as a total whole, not taking into account particular populations that differ geographically. Biodiversity of provincial, regional, or state is limited. In other words, inaccurate for Nova Scotian subspecies population to be listed least concern when mortality is increasing drastically. Couswick Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, an organization that identifies and assesses a species on the number of individuals, population, habitat availability, and possible threats. Rates species 1 of 5 categories: special concern, threatened, endangered, extirpated, or extinct. The red knot subspecies in Canada is ranked as endangered. Having consistent advancement in technology over time, present and in future time, can lead to a more innovative way to collect data of a population's interaction with the environment. A mechanism that we personally think would be useful would be a drone-like machine similar to as what the Canadian Armed Forces use. A UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, or RPAS, a remotely piloted aerial system. Currently used as an aerial surveillance / intelligent target acquisition system, and overall situation awareness mechanism used in situations where manned flight is too difficult or too risky in the air, providing troops with 24/7 eyes from above, which transmits data back to the ground. This would be a useful mechanism that could be modified to follow the migration of the red knots, or any species of that, beginning in their breeding ground population in the northern region and follow through their entire migration route. This would be able to begin with the original population, flow with each continental layover over the course of the migration term. A sustainable mechanism able to transmit data for conservationists to collect and propose an action plan to those areas vulnerable to put the population at risk, or the increase in mortality, or deciphering the factors contributing to the fluctuation of the red knot species over a generation term.
For our project, one of the species we chose to talk about was the piping plover, a small finch-sized shore bird belonging to the phylum Chordata, class Aves. There are 2 main populations, one that nests in the Atlantic region and the other that nests in the interior of North America, including the Great Plains and the Great Lakes. There's also been questions pertaining to the classification of the piping plover to classify them as 2 separate subspecies in regards to where they nest. The first one being the Charadrius melodous, the Atlantic population, and the second one being the Charadrius melodous circumcinctus, the interior North American Great Plains and Great Lakes population. Piping plovers are small birds with mostly white plumage. Adults are approximately 17 centimeters long and only weigh about 43 to 64 grams. That's an equivalent to the weight of about 6 toonies, to make it easier to get an idea of their size. In spring and summer, they have a black stripe around the neck and one on their forehead between the eyes, with a light brown back and head similar to the color of sand. Their beaks are orange with a black tip. This helps to camouflage them when they are on the beach, either on their nest or foraging for food. In contrast, in the late summer, the adult birds lose their black feathers and their beaks turn black.
Piping plovers breed in late April and May, and the chicks will start to hatch in May and June. Plovers begin to migrate in mid-July, but can stay in Nova Scotia as late as September. Their habitat ranges from Newfoundland to South Carolina, and sometimes they even reach the Caribbean islands. Eastern Canada is their breeding ground, where they nest on dry, open sand or pebble beaches and feed on mud and algal flats and intertidal areas.
As for piping plover diet, they love to feed in bayside intertidal zones in sand, mud, and algal flat areas. Although the diet is not very well known, they forage for yummy things that include marine worms, flies, and fly larvae, beetles, small crustaceans, and other small invertebrates. They use the stop and peck method, as well as using a foot to vibrate the sand to draw out invertebrates to the surface.
Piping plovers face many threats in Nova Scotia because they cannot adapt to human activities and predators. Chicks can't fly for around the first month of their life, and chicks and eggs are tiny and sand-colored, so they often get run over by people, dogs, and vehicles. Predators pose a large threat to piping plovers in Nova Scotia. These include foxes, raccoons, minks, crows, gulls, dogs, and cats. Pollution adds to this problem because garbage left on the beach and washed up on shore attracts even more predators. One of the greatest threats to plovers is the habitat loss. Plovers breed on wide, pebbly, or sandy beaches and sand spits. They lay their eggs between the high tide mark and sand dunes, and typically brood or lay eggs only once a season. One clutch usually contains 4 eggs. A major factor limiting the population growth is the lack of genetic diversity. Half of the plover population that breeds in southern Nova Scotia is reproductively isolated from the rest of the plover population in eastern Nova Scotia. Every year, the birds return to the same area they were born in to breed. This lack of genetic exchange, combined with the declining population, increases the risk of inbreeding, which reduces their survival rate. The less genetic diversity and exchange happening in this population, the greater their risk of extinction becomes, due to their reduced ability to evolve and adapt to changes in the environment. Environmental change is also a contributor to their loss of habitat. Storms change the beaches and cause erosion. This creates steeper and narrower beaches and allows plants to fill in. Plovers will only nest on wide beaches with no dense vegetation. Human-induced climate change has caused storms to become more powerful, which reduces the amount of safe breeding area for the plovers. Plover nests can also be flooded by higher tides and storm surges. Another threat to plovers is human disturbance. Adult plovers will abandon their nests if there's too much human activity in their nesting area. If they abandon their nests because they're scared, they leave the nest unprotected and the eggs and chicks are even more vulnerable. People cause a threat to plovers by walking on the beach and crushing eggs unknowingly, or letting their pets eat eggs and chicks. Vehicles on the beach damage the sand dunes and leave large tracks in the sand that trap plover chicks and separate them from their families.
There is things in place to help conserve the plovers, where they rope off popular nesting sites at beaches, put up cages that allow only the birds to get to the nest, and also signs. They also tag birds with color-coded bands to monitor which birds are returning. I think that some good ways to advance the conservation of these really cute birds is to create a sanctuary for them, stricter building laws, and raising awareness about the dangers they are facing. Creating a sanctuary where biologists, ornithologists, ecologists, and geneticists could work together to create a sanctuary protected from the weather elements, predators, human activities would be greatly beneficial for these birds. They could simulate their natural environment, create a breeding program, and ensure they are increasing genetic diversity in the population, and then release them back into the wild. Stricter building laws on coastal beach areas to prevent builders from developing these lands where the birds nest would also help increase their population size. As for the ropes around nesting sites, it's a good idea, but I think in order to prevent ATVs from driving on the beaches and sand dunes, maybe a metal railing would be better. Lastly, awareness is crucial. If people don't know the dangers they pose to the shore birds, they can't take positive steps towards preserving them. There is a Facebook page dedicated to the piping plovers that is helping to create awareness, clean up our beaches, and further the conservation of these amazing creatures.